sorry for people who ask Jesus questions, because they don't often get the answers they expect. But to be honest, I don't feel too bad for the lawyer in Luke chapter 10, because I presume that he knew better. The reason I presume that is because I've heard it said that a lawyer should never ask a question in public that they don't already know the answer to. So I presume that when the lawyer asked Jesus the question, he knew what Jesus' answer would be. But here's kind of the amazing thing about this encounter between this lawyer and Jesus. The lawyer starts out asking Jesus a question, and it turns out that Jesus responds with a question to the lawyer. He asked him this question to test him, but it turns out that it was the lawyer who was being put to the test. But what I wonder is this. Sometimes when we question Jesus, when we want to put him to the test, do we find that we often are the ones who are being tested? He asks him a rather simple question, one where there is, at least in the Jewish community at Jesus' time, there was agreed upon answer. It's an answer that we as Christians would agree upon. When the lawyer went to Jesus, he said, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus' response was, "Well, what do the scriptures say?" And he answers, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind and your soul and your strength, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "Good job. You're right. Do that, and you will live." This is where the passage gets more difficult, because the lawyer couldn't just accept Jesus' answer to his question. He had to push him a little further. I think it's because the lawyer was actually a little bit anxious about Jesus' answer, because he knew it was the right answer, but his question was, well, how far does this go? So he comes to him with a second question, and he says, "Well then, who is my neighbor?" This is an important question. It's an important question because it hits upon something. It comes up not just for him, but for all of us. The question of who is my neighbor? What are the boundaries of my neighborhood? Now, if you were to ask me, "Ryan, where's your neighborhood?" I would say, well, it's like my street, this other street, and it goes around and it comes out all the way up to Twining Road, because that's where I let my kids ride their bikes, right? Without asking. But that's not really what Jesus means by what is your neighborhood. This question that's being asked is a bigger question. And the lawyer, he doesn't ask this question because he's hoping that Jesus is going to give an expansive answer. He asks because he hopes he's going to give a restrictive answer. That he already thought that he and Jesus would agree on who their neighbors were. And the lawyer, like all of us, wanted to know, what is the boundary of my concern for the people around me? You know, the reality is, it wasn't just the lawyer, it's all of us, isn't it? We all want to set up these boundaries, and we as human beings, I think it's embedded in our DNA. We set up boundaries and differences and markers between people, and we use that as a way to be the boundary of our human concern. There are some simple ones, moral ones, like Eagles fans and Cowboys fans. Like, we all know that Eagles fans are on the side of the Lord and Cowboys fans are not, right? I mean, that's clear. Yeah, thank you, Carmen. It's one of the first amens I've ever gotten, and that's awesome. But there are more serious ones, too. We divide ourselves by our gender, male and female. We divide ourselves by the color of our skin. We divide ourselves by the neighborhood in which we live. We divide ourselves by the level of education. We divide ourselves by our socioeconomic standing. We divide ourselves by the language that we speak, by the accent that we have, by the place that we grew up, by the country in which your ancestors came. We divide ourselves by all these sorts of things. In many cases, we use them as a way to set up boundaries for our concern. I think as human beings, it's built into us to think that we owe more, that we are more responsible for those who are like us, who look like us, who think like us, who speak like us. we tend to think that the boundaries are set by these sorts of things. But what we find is that in Jesus' answer to this lawyer, he's not just telling him, how big is your neighborhood? He's also going at all these divisions that we have, and he's attacking them at their foundation, and he's telling us that these divisions are not things that should set the boundary of our concern for other people. As a matter of fact, he's telling us that it doesn't matter. About a year and a half ago, I had the opportunity to sit down with a group of Presbyterian pastors and rabbis from the community. And we met at a church, and we sat around tables, and there was someone there who brought to us I think it's the HarperCollins Jewish Study New Testament. And they were there partially because they wanted to sell us something, of course. But also they were there because they told us, they said that it's important for us as Jews and Christians to sometimes sit down together and talk. Because we have a common text that we share in the Old Testament, but often we have diverging interpretations. We have the New Testament, which he said, for Christians, it's important sometimes for us to listen to people outside the Christian community because they come at it with fresh eyes and they see things that we don't see. But he said it's important for rabbis to read the New Testament because it helps them to understand how we as Christians understand the New Testament, because we read the New Testament through the lens of the Old Testament. And I believe, that the Old Testament is ultimately incomprehensible without seeing it through the lens of the New Testament and who Jesus Christ is. So we sat down and we were in these groups, and they opened up the Bible. They opened it to Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 37, the very passage that we're looking at today. And we read it. There were a couple of surprising things. Number one, none of the rabbis in my group had ever read that passage before, and they knew nothing about it other than the idea of a Good Samaritan. The other interesting thing is they didn't even know what a Samaritan was. It's something that in their tradition has essentially been lost. They knew that there were some divisions, so we explained to them who the Samaritans were, that they were from the northern kingdom, and they were remnants and all this. We explained that there was this great division between them, but they were really not that aware of the divisions in first century Judaism. But as we read the passage, one of the rabbis said, well, the first thing that's obvious is that Jesus is a good rabbi because he doesn't answer anyone's question. But he also said, we also know that he's a good rabbi because someone asks him a direct question and he answers it with a story because he wants him not just to understand it in his head, but he wants him to get it in his heart. So Jesus told this parable so that we would understand with our hearts what it means to be good neighbors. And Jesus tells this story that we know so well about the man that is traveling down from Jerusalem. And there are a few things that one of the rabbis pointed out that kind of poked holes in some of my inheritance of understanding of this passage. One of them is this. I've always assumed that the man who was beaten and left for dead by the side of the road was Jewish. But we don't know that. The text doesn't tell us. It tells us simply that it was a man. We know nothing about him other than he's lying there at the side of the road. We don't know if he has a Cowboys jersey on or an Eagles jersey on. We don't know, and it doesn't seem to matter to Jesus. There's simply a man who's wounded and lying by the side of the road. The other thing is, have you ever heard interpretations of why the priest and the Levite didn't stop and help the wounded man by the side of the road? I've heard lots of reasons. If you've watched VeggieTales, you know it's because they're too busy, right? They have this busy, I'm too busy song. But I've heard other reasons too. I've heard reasons like they were on their way to Jerusalem to worship and they didn't want to make themselves ceremonially unclean by touching blood or a potentially dead body, so they avoided touching this man who was injured. I've heard other people say that they only cared about people of their own religion, so they didn't stop and say anything. What was interesting is one of the rabbis pointed out that if you go to Israel, Jerusalem is one of the highest places in the whole country. And when they talk about Jerusalem, whenever it talks about going there or coming back, there's a particular language that they use. You always say, I'm going up to Jerusalem or down from Jerusalem. If you're on the way there, you're going up. If you're on your way back, you're coming down. So what do we learn about the priest and the Levite? The text tells us, on their way down, they weren't going to Jerusalem to worship. They were coming from worship back into the world. The priest and the Levite saw this wounded man by the side of the road. They weren't worried about being ceremonially unclean. We don't have any idea what they were thinking or why they didn't stop. The text simply doesn't tell us, and for us to imagine that it's because they're too busy or they didn't want to become unclean is nothing more than a guess. And one of these rabbis pointed out something that has stuck with me ever since he said it. He said, the tragedy in Jesus' story is this, that they had been to Jerusalem, they had been to the temple, they had sat at the feet of teachers, they had heard the word of the Lord, they had been hopefully challenged by it, and they came down and they saw a man who was injured. And in both cases it tells us the same thing. They came down, they saw him, and they crossed over to the other side. They heard the word of the Lord. They didn't do anything about it. They understood in their heads what it said. But they didn't live it out when they left Jerusalem. And then it's the Samaritan, the outsider, the one who, in a Jewish thought world, would have never understood the word of the Lord. He's the one who, when it says, saw the man lying by the side of the road, the passage tells us, was filled with pity. Another way that could be translated is, was filled with compassion. They took the man, they put him on his own animal, and they took him to an inn, and he cared for him, and he covered his wounds, and he treated them with oil and wine. And he gave 2 days' wages to the innkeeper and told him, I'll be back, and if it costs you anything more than that, let me know, and I'll pay that too. It was the one that the listeners would never expect, who seemed to hear and understand the demand of God. And then Jesus turns to the lawyer and he asks him this question. So who was the neighbor to the man who had been beaten? And the answer, of course, was the one who showed him mercy. And then Jesus said, go and do likewise. You know, when I hear that passage, I oftentimes put myself in the place of the person who's been beaten, or the place of the so-called Good Samaritan. But if I'm honest with myself, I think I'm somebody who wants my neighborhood sometimes to be small. I find myself as someone who oftentimes thinks about the things that divide us and lets that influence my decision-making sometimes. I wonder if that's true for you too. What Jesus was saying to this young lawyer was this: your neighborhood is far too small. If you think your neighborhood only stretches on those 3 streets around your house, that's not true. If you think your neighborhood is only made up of people who look like you, that's not true. If you think your neighborhood is made up of people who act like you, that's not true. If you think that your neighborhood is made up of people who speak your language, that's not true. Jesus tells this young lawyer that his neighborhood is made up of all those who are in need that he sees. As far as your eye can reach, that is your neighborhood. That is the boundary of our concern. What Jesus tells us, essentially, is there is no boundary to your concern. The world is our neighborhood. Those who are suffering are our responsibility. It's fascinating to me that in the passage, Jesus didn't say anything about the man lying by the side of the road. He could have been religious, he could have been irreligious, he could have been anti-religious. We don't know. And it didn't seem to matter. He could have agreed with everything that the Samaritan thought. He could have disagreed with everything. It didn't matter. What mattered is that the Samaritan saw a person who was hurting, and he was filled with compassion, and he reached out with generosity and with love. On the 13th of November, we're doing this Church Has Left the Building, and it's not just a ploy to get us out to serve. It's because it's my prayer, it's Eric's prayer, it's the whole leadership of our church's prayer. But this is a way for us to very concretely live out our faith by serving our neighbors. And there's going to be a bunch of ways to do that, but as we do this, I want you to realize that we're thinking about our neighborhood, not just here in Ambler, but our neighborhood is those who are in need that we can see. We're going to be doing a few things at Ambler. We're going to be planting some trees. We're going to be doing some things to be good neighbors. We're going to be serving in interfaith. We're going to be serving some of our neighbors who were at one time homeless but now have a place to live. We're going to be doing some things here at our church. We're going to be doing 10,000 meals. And those meals are going to be sent all over the world. We don't know where they're going to be, but they're going to be given to our neighbors who are hungry. We're going to be doing Operation Christmas Child, assembling these boxes and taking them to the delivery point. And we're going to take them, and they're going to go somewhere in the world. We don't know where it will be, but it will be a gift to our neighbors who are in need, who otherwise would not have anything for Christmas. We're going to be going down to West Kensington, and we're going to be working on the West Kensington Ministries building. We're going to be helping them make one of their rooms a much better space for them, because we're going to be serving alongside our neighbors in need to give them what they need for ministry in that place, in our neighborhood. So this morning, I guess I have a question for us, a question for you. What is your neighborhood? What do you think Jesus would say if you asked him that question? Jesus, what is my neighborhood? I hope this week that is a question that you will commit to prayer. That you will ask God, God, show me my neighborhood. If you ask God to show you your neighborhood, I think you'll find it's not just the people in the houses next door. It's not just people who look and think like us. It's all of the people that God puts in our path. And he asks us to look with love and with compassion, so that they might see in us the love and compassion of God. Let us pray.